We've got another interesting show for you, which we think you're going to enjoy. Mike Goldstein is back to talk about the special project that Diana Hubbard had him do in the early 1980s to get going Scientology with Book One, Dianetics, the Modern Science of Mental Health, and developing seminars to get people into Dianetics and Scientology. It's a very interesting story. It involves an old-time Dianeticist named John Galusha and what happened during this time period. I think you'll find it interesting. We hope you enjoy it. Stay tuned. Greetings, everyone. Welcome to our channel, Scientology Peeling the Onion. My name is Mark Fisher. I'm here with my co-host, Janice Gillum-Grady. Hi, Janice. How you doing today?
G'day, Mark. Doing good. G'day, everybody. And welcome to Scientology Peeling the Onion. We're doing well over here in Las Vegas, right, Mark?
That's right. Yeah, things are starting to cool off a little bit, which is nice. But you know, we're actually doing pretty well right now.
I'm swimming twice a day. I have Elizabeth here, so we've been swimming twice a day and having a good time.
That's great. That's great. Well, we're continuing our interview series with Mike Goldstein, and we're going to pick up where we left off last time, and we're going to be talking about what happened after he left the Sea Organization, and they kept pulling him back in to do some other projects and stuff, right, Janice?
Yeah, and we're not getting into Sector 9 yet.
Not yet. But we think you'll find this interesting. This is going to be a little bit about the basics of Scientology and Dianetics from back in the early days, and what was somewhat successful getting people into Scientology. And Mike played a big role in that at the time. So we're gonna go into details on that. We've got photographs, and I think you guys are going to find it informative.
Yeah, it is informative. So yeah let's bring on Golds.
All right, without further ado, here he is, Mike Goldstein. How you doing, Mike?
Good. How are you guys doing?
Doing good.
Doing well. Yeah.
Well, welcome to Hawaii. We're all coordinated.
That's it. Aloha. Anyway, where we left off last episode is that you had left the Sea Organization. We're back in Denver, and they kept pulling you in for different things, and you had a visit from a famous Scientologist, right? And why don't you go ahead and pick up from there, and we'll tell those stories again.
Well, basically, I was contacted, like I mentioned the last time, by Diana Hubbard when I was working at my dad's, and she was telling me that she really hadn't been in touch with her father, and that things were happening in the church where it was a big change going on, and she was very concerned. And the only place they really weren't messing with was the area under her, which was Division 6, which dealt with bringing new people into the organizations. And they were more, the people that were taking over and starting to run the church were more interested in the people that were already online and the money that was there. They really weren't interested in her area. So she felt that this was the one way that maybe she could turn things around, was by getting something really going in her area with it, which is distribution, getting new people in. And so she came to me for that assistance. And at the time, like I mentioned the last show, I told, and she wanted me to come there, and I said, no, I don't think it can be done there. You want to do something in the field, you have to do it from the field, and I wouldn't even want to be involved with management again. So I think it needs to be done out here, and I'll do an evaluation and put things together, and then I'll get back to you. And basically in that evaluation, so to speak, that I did, I really kind of been thinking about this and working in the area for some years, since I was actually on the ship working with Hubbard. And he had given me a post, which I mentioned before, LRH Properties Chief, properties being all of his copyrighted materials and everything. And right. in his hour-long, what he called his hat write-up to me, turning that over, I viewed it as a marketing hat, and yet all of the programs he had, except for one, were all about get programs of people that are already on services, that sort of thing. And the only thing he had was this one idea for a grassroots movement, which he called the Volunteer Ministers Program, which I love the idea of a grassroots movement. That's the way I thought. That's really what I thought the whole marketing thing was about, what it should be about. Yet his idea of volunteer ministers seemed pretty hokey to me, and that it was not something that would really work. But he was very, very much interested in getting this thing going. But I never thought that was the right way. So when I always thought at that time it was involving Dianetics, the Modern Science of Mental Health, which was the first book on the subject. And that book, when it came out in 1950, people bought it and then started auditing, started working with other people, because the book itself was a handbook on that procedure, and it told people how to do it. It wasn't honestly that well written for people to understand and be able to do it, but information was in there, and
Right.
it was intact. It in itself didn't need anything else. That's what they were doing at that time, and that was the thing that really got Scientology off the ground eventually. That's where Dianetic counseling groups started springing up, and that was the big expansion. And Hubbard had tried to bring about that kind of an expansion and never had been able to again. And so my attention, even on the ship, was on that book and selling it. I didn't even think about application at that time. I just was going with other things he'd said as far as getting that book out there. So I tried to do that on the ship, couldn't do it, and eventually I left I left and went back to Denver, and I still was in the Sea Org, and then, like I mentioned in the other shows, when I took over the Denver org, one of the programs that we did in Division 6, among lots of things, was I wanted to really get the book out there. So I had a very successful program in selling the book. We had, ads we did. I mentioned it in movie theaters, and we sold lots of books from our office, and we had all these other programs going, but yet none of the programs really worked to expand us, even including selling the Book One. And and we were investing all this money, and the only thing that seemed to work well to get people onto the major services, from when I'd gone back a year later and evaluated where are these major service buyers coming from other people, what we call field staff members, FSMs.
Right.
So I just stopped doing these programs because it was costing us so much, and put all our initiative into FSMs, which of course got me in trouble because those sub-product statistics of things like new people in the door all crashed. And I figured, who cares? It's not who cares. But they do. And so at that time, I wasn't sure where to go. Well, now that I'm doing this whole evaluation about, I have to come up with something that's going to really bring people in, some program for Diana that's going to be we can do without gaining a lot of attention from the existing management. Give me enough time to get something done, and also what would be the best program. And none of these things would work, except the Book One was where my attention was. And then in doing it, I realized, well, what they were doing back in the 50s, they weren't just selling the book; they were applying it. That was all they had. So that book was complete in terms of being able to go out. And this was before they had the e-meter like that. That was one of the first. I think that's the Matheson meter was one of the first meters. And this is probably a few years before that. And so people were out there doing that. They were auditing each other. They were auditing other people. It was a great expansion. But since Scientology came about, since he started doing other things, it all fell to the background. Nobody really applied the information in that book. Okay, later he came out with Dianetics courses like the Hubbard Standard Dianetics course. He even had another one earlier in Wichita in 1952. But nobody really was doing the type of Dianetics processing, auditing that they were doing just with Book One. That just became something auditors read to kind of get a background of what they're really doing now, right? So when I after this evaluation, I realized, my God, nobody's doing this. This hasn't been done since the 50s. So it's not like I'm proposing to do something that somebody else is doing in the church. They weren't doing it and haven't done it. Nobody did. And so that was in itself fantastic. Plus, everything was encompassed within that book that I'd been pushing all these years, right? So this became, it lit me up. I thought, oh my gosh, this is it. This can be the Div 6, because all the other activities they were doing weren't doing much. So basically, I was looking at becoming the Div 6 for the church, right? And it all kind of clicked and made sense. And made sense to Diana. She flew to Denver, like I mentioned before, and because I wouldn't do it without her approval, and she approved it there in the airport, turned around, went back to Clearwater. And now that I had her signature, I only needed the one thing from her, which was what she called air cover, right?
Right.
And that's all I wanted, just to keep the management and the guardian's office off of me until we get this thing going.
No, I was going to say. So what was the actual program? What were you going to do? What was?
Well, the program was I wanted to have an extension or correspondence course that we could deliver and train competent Book One auditors. Because one of the things that I realized had happened in the 50s is not only had they sort of abandoned it, but I thought, well, why didn't these other auditors out there continue doing it? Some of them did that I ran into, but they never got involved with the church. Mm-hmm. The ones that did gave it up. And so
I remember in the 70s, there's still being guys from the 50s who were like, Hubbard had it with Dianetics. He went on to Scientology, but he had it with Dianetics. Right. And these Dianeticists were still practicing and doing their Book One auditing 20, 30 years later.
Oh yeah. What I got, as I mentioned once before, I got in because of Book One. There was an old timer from the 50s by the name of Bob Arntz living in Boulder. And he had been doing Book One auditing on this cop up there, this sergeant of the Boulder Police Department. And this guy ended up working with me. And then he trained me. And then I didn't know anything about Scientology. Neither did he. Bob Arntz never mentioned it. All we were doing, he was a Dianetic auditor, and we were down Dianetic. And then I see stamped in the book that I had, Scientology Denver. What the heck, Scientology? I asked the other guy that's been working with me. His name was Gene Sparks. What's that? I go, I don't know. I think it's, they have some sort of an organization. I think it's connected. So I called them up, and that's how I got involved, found out about Scientology. But I never did.
Let me ask. I've never seen Book One, Dianetics Book One auditing, and I was involved in Scientology for a long time because I did the other route and did the Dianetics course and that type of thing. But explain for our viewers, because they probably don't understand, what is actually Book One auditing? What's the simplicity of it?
Well, one of the the best thing I can mention about it. Okay, it's a very basic form of auditing where you're only taking up what the client wants to handle. That's it. That's your own. That's all that you're doing is a person. The one thing that anybody has in common that goes anywhere for improvement, therapy or anywhere, is when they have something about themselves they don't like, they want to handle, resolve, change, or improve, and that's what's on their attention. So Book One was just addressing what the client wanted to handle. That's what it was. And which, by the way, was abandoned with Scientology. A lot of people look at Scientology and go, but the big difference is because they're talking about the spirit instead of the mind. That wasn't it, really. Yes, that's true to an extent. But what really changed in 1952 was that he abandoned believing the PC, the pre-clear. In Book One, you are only handling what that person wanted to handle, resolve, change, or improve. And Hubbard never considered, when you read the book, one of the things he said is he always had to have an explanation for every phenomena. His explanation was this file clerk. He said that in there, the file clerk will present, but he was saying, if the file clerk will present what needs to be done. You don't have to figure anything out. You just take that up, okay? And you took it up by trying to find, you get to the very beginning of where an incident began. That's the whole point. And he believed that if you got to this beginning, it would clear up the condition. Yes.
But you're addressing in Dianetics, though, and Book One, the reactive mind, right? In other words, that's what you're going.
That's what
he considered what was called the reactive mind, which were the pain and unconsciousness and the things in your mind like trauma that you had or experienced. Is that right?
Well, he had it worked out in an explanation that there was a reactive mind and an analytical mind, and the reactive mind just acts automatically. That it was like a mind. That's how he described it. Okay, his explanation for the phenomena that you're seeing, and his idea at the time was, and one of the major things in Dianetics, starting with Book One, is at the bottom of that, at the bottom, and when this thing started, there was always a moment of an incident of pain and unconsciousness, which he called the engram, right? And that you had to get down to the basic engram to clean it up. All right. And so he would work down these chains of events till he got to the engram. And if you clear up that, the idea was that the condition would go away. And then he
that's where the command, go to the beginning of the incident and tell me when you were there, comes from.
Right. And then and he had this idea in Dianetics and in Book One that you had these chains of these incidents that connected to these conditions.
Right.
And it got all the way to the present, where you had what was called a lock, which was just something that was similar to what had occurred originally, but there was no pain, there was no unconsciousness, there was no loss. It was just some little thing that happened, right? But below that, there was what he called a secondary engram, which had to do with loss, and that sort of. And then to get down to the real nitty gritty, which always was, according to him, pain and unconsciousness. Okay, and that's there's similarity, of course, in the later Dianetics, but that's basically what the auditor's doing.
Yeah, and then the idea is when you got down to that basic engram and fully viewed it or whatever as the person looking at it, it would disappear. It basically would erase. It would disappear, and it would no longer affect you. That was the end phenomenon that you were looking for. It was gone.
Right. It would go from the reactive mind into the analytical mind as just a piece of experience.
Right. Something you remember, but it doesn't bring on a headache or a pain or whatever. Right.
Well, yeah, it doesn't have that kind of
emotional attachment. Yeah.
Exactly. In other words, the person is not compelled to do it. He no longer has that as a condition. He can take it or leave it. It's done. If you get down to that point. And in many cases, people reach those points on these incidents. And so there was a lot of hypotheses in there that a lot of later people thought this is, true. But Hubbard mainly was just, like, for instance, one of the big things was clear. You talk about clear. Well, he had never made any clears when he wrote the book. He just hypothesized that at some point, if you get all these engrams, the bank will come apart. And you won't have a reactive mind, and then you will be clear with all these great phenomena, right?
That's right.
He hadn't made one, but this was the idea. It was
the goal. It was the goal.
Yeah,
it was what he was trying to achieve.
It wasn't stated that way, but that if you really looked at it, it was like, if you do this, this will happen. He also talked about curing diabetes. He hadn't, but he would put these things in the book. So a lot of people got confused by it, but that's really what he was saying. If you keep doing this, you will achieve this. Okay, and that was
now. Can you describe how Book One auditing is different than auditing with a meter and with Scientology, because there's no meter involved? Is that right? Explain to people how people would do Book One auditing. What was the procedure? In other words, did they twin up? Did they have to go to somebody professional? No.
Well, some people were professional. It was just like auditing later. I mean, they went in a session and they did the session. Sometimes people worked with each other. It depends. It just worked the same way. You'd sit down and you'd work with the guy. You just didn't need a meter. You just went by what the person said in their own indicator.
Right. I remember as a kid, my parents doing Book One auditing, and then they got more people in, and with our living room turned into a course room of people doing Book One auditing. You didn't have to go off to your own little space, but people just sat there across from each other, asking them, that's why I remember, go to the beginning of the incident and tell me when you're there, because that's what I would keep hearing in the living room.
Well, that's, yeah. And this was like before meters. And a lot of times later on with meters, people really weren't paying attention to what the guy was saying anyway.
Right.
So these were really good auditors that were doing that at that time. And like you said, you run into these guys, these old timers like that. And I remember when Regis would come from AO, they'd try to find these old timers here. And they go out, most of these guys saying, I'm doing fine. I don't need any of that. I haven't done anything since then. I'm doing great. So, they just blow them off. And that's the way a lot of those old Dianeticists, even the ones that weren't doing a Dianet, they just were just living their life. And they didn't feel they needed any of that. And they didn't even want to talk to these guys. Right. So anyway, that's really what was happening in the 50s was that kind of work. And so a lot of people like me or Gene Sparks, people like that got involved with some old timer, we didn't know about Scientology. We just did the stuff out of the book. So anyway, here we were now, this 1980, May of 1980, when Diana approved that. And it was like, now I can, to get this in and get this application. But the big thing was, for me, was why did they stop? It was, they weren't being encouraged, but also a lot of these guys that continued, they never had been competent at it. They weren't that good at it. So it was easy to give it up, right? Because they say, oh yeah, that's old stuff. We got this new stuff now. We got this. Oh, okay. And so that for me, it was like, the difference is we're going to put it back in, but I want to train these people to be competent and really know what they need to do. Right. And at the time, I'd been a Book One auditor, but I didn't feel I was anywhere close to being able to put such a course together. I didn't know the book that well. I just kind of did it, but there were a lot of things I didn't quite understand, and I wouldn't have known how to do it. So this was the big bugaboo. How do I get this course? That's, and I remember talking to Diana after she went back about this, and she says, I think there was a course like that in the 50s that was being delivered in DC. And because all of the courses, there were presently Book One extension courses that you could get through pubs, the publications that did, but none of these courses were designed to train auditors. They just get them going and then use it as another Division 6 leader service to get them in on services.
Right.
Right.
That's all it was. Nobody. But I'm looking for a course that actually trains them, right? And so Diana says, I think there was such a course in DC. Let me look through. We need to find it. So I'm going to go look through the flag archives. But somebody, we need to also look in DC. Well, fortunately, an old friend of mine from the ship, Greg Wellhair, who we mentioned before, yeah. Greg was running the DC org at the time. And Greg and I had become very close on the ship because our wives were in the programs bureau together, Rebecca and Sandy, and they were both RPF'd at the same time. So while they were in the RPF, we hung out a lot together. We became really good friends. So I called Greg in DC and I told him about the project and what we were doing. And so he went down and went through the flag archives, and the DC archives, because those are the two places that it would be. But neither of them could find this course. The only thing that was discovered was who was delivering. If the course was delivered, who would have delivered it? And it was a guy by the name of John Galusha. And I go, God, I know that guy. First of all, I knew him because I remember hearing his name first on the study tapes. He was mentioned on the study tapes because he had been there helping Hubbard supervise the first St. Hill Special Briefing course. And he had been around since the early 50s. And he wasn't just an old timer. He was like Hubbard's right-hand man throughout the 50s in Wichita, Phoenix, DC. He basically helped research Scientology with him from that time, and had been working with them through all those years. And talk to the old timers, he was pretty famous amongst them. He also delivered all the early ACCs, which were advanced clinical courses. When you mentioned the people lined up across from each other, those are the old congresses.
Yeah.
And he supervised and ran all that stuff, in these places. He actually supervised the first Philadelphia doctrine course. In Phoenix, it was delivered. I believe that the first person was supposed to deliver it was Hubbard's son, Nibs. And he was off treasure hunting in the Superstition Mountains, so it fell over to John. So John did it. So he had done all these, he was just...
That's just so everybody knows, that's John on the left there with Hubbard back in the 1950s, right?
And this is this is a picture of John and LRH at a 58-59 Congress in Washington, D.C., with Hubbard with his famous Congress tuxedo outfit. And you see some people dancing in the background. But this was a picture taken by John's wife, Millie Galusha, who was also pretty famous. Millie was she was Hubbard's secretary in D.C. And before that, she was Lyndon Johnson's secretary. And then she became Hubbard's. And so she was quite famous. And she took this picture. And so anyway, I remembered these people. I knew of them. And when I was running the Denver org, I also realized he's here. He's local. He's in the area. Because he lived in Golden, Colorado, which was right in the foothills. And he would come when I was doing the org, he would come down once in a while to do a Sunday service or bring his kids in for a comm course. But by the time I would make it downstairs to meet him, he was in and out. Guy did not hang around. He didn't really want to talk to anybody. He did what they asked, and he was gone. So I never really met him. So at this time, I figured I got to meet this guy, see what he can tell me about this course. So I get his number from the local org, and I call the guy up, and he agrees to see me. So I drove out to his house in this beautiful area, right on the foothills of the mountains, right there. And I got to meet him and Millie there, these famous old Scientologists, and which was great. But he had a lot of people over the years come to see him, and he basically would turn every one of them away. They'd be in and out of the door. They didn't even know what happened to them. They were just there to what happened, and they're gone. And so I figured, and the way he looked at me, not even a smile, just a stoic look. Okay, I'll listen to you. Okay, what do you want to tell? So I sat down on the couch, and he sat down in a chair across from me, and I just started yakking. So started telling about the eval, about the history. And he didn't say a word. He just sat there, like I said, stoically, just looking at me. And I must have talked for almost an hour, just yakking, which I can do, obviously. And so when I'm done with the whole thing, he goes, well, I haven't been interested in doing anything for 16 years until now. I'll help you.
Wow.
He says, but I got to tell you something. That course that we delivered in D.C. that you're looking for, it never existed. It was the same kind of an extension course that they are delivering that you're mentioning from pubs. It was just to get people in. That course, there was no course like that, and there never has been. And of course, I'm sick. He says, but I can write it for you if you want. You can? He goes, oh yeah. Because this guy, when he started delivering Book One was in 1950. He was an avid reader, and he saw the ad in the back of Amazing Science Fiction. So he ordered the book, and he walked down to the local post. He lived in Pueblo, Colorado, on a farm. So he walked into town and picked up the book from the post office, went home, read it a second time, and then collared his sister, as he used to say, and put her in a session. And before long, he had a thriving practice going, doing this. And he audited that way until 1952, when Hubbard went to Wichita and started the first foundation and was delivering the first Dianetics course. And that's what he and a friend of his by the name of Haskell Cook, who we might mention.
I knew Haskell.
Yeah. Haskell was a pilot, and so they flew down to Wichita to do that first course together. And so he had that kind of experience. And it turned out that not only was familiar with the book, he knew it by heart. He knew that book by heart. He could have rewritten it. It was amazing. He could quote line anywhere. Oh, that's on page, like that kind of a thing. So anyway, but I didn't know all that at the time. I just figured, this is my only hope, if he can do it. So he says, come back in a week and I'll have your course. And then I'm out the door, right? I got to meet Millie, which was cool, but that was it, So, I'm waiting for this week, finally the week I call up and I said, I'm calling you back. And he says, yeah, I've got it. Come on over. So I go over to his house and he hands me these little spiral notebooks, like, the kind that people used to go shopping with, they're only about this big.
Those things, yeah.
Little tiny spiral notebooks about this
like
big.
Two by 3.
Yeah, they could put in your back pocket. And he hands me a little stack of them. And I look and I go, what's this? He goes, that's your course. And I look at it, and they're just questions that go, in sequence, 1, 2, 3, like several hundred questions. That's all. That's what it is. And they're all, written in this that he apparently did during his lunch hour, because he was working at the time doing master welding at some big company, where he's like 60 years old, and the oldest guy in there was probably 25 because it was such hard labor. But he loved that stuff. So, but he just did it during his lunch hour. So he hands me this, and so I said, okay. And I didn't know what to say. I'm thinking, oh my God, maybe this. I don't know what this is, but I just thanked him and left. And I'm going out the car. I'm thinking maybe this guy's just, out of it or something. Because what is this? So I start looking at the question. I'm sitting in the car and I start looking at this stuff, and I noticed that it's all written in pencil, but no erasures. There's no erasure. It's pencil, but everything is just written, with not any erasures. And I started looking at the questions. I can't answer a lot of them. I can't answer a lot of them. I'm thinking, what is this? So I figure what I'm going to do is I'm going to just take it home. It's all I got, and I'll just see what happens. So I went home, sat down at a typewriter, and I just divided the questions into, like, I don't remember, 10, 20 lessons, right? And then just typed it up as a course. This is the Book One, Dianetics extension, correspondence course or whatever. And then I would just have so many questions were lesson 1, so many questions lesson 2, like that, until and put it in that form and typed it up. And then I went and I figured, well, anybody that's going to know if this is any good would be Rebecca. She's read that book lots of times as an old class 8. She's word cleared it in Qual. She's word cleared other people in Qual on it over the years. She'll know that book, cold.
Right.
So, but all I did is I said, Rebecca, I want you to look at something and tell me what you think. So I hand her the typed up course, and she sits down and she starts reading it. And then her eyes start, and she look at them, and then she grab her Dianetics book and look it up. And so I'm going, what's going on? She's just, leave me alone. Get out of here. Get away from me. Let me do this. So about an hour later, she comes in the other room and says, where did you get that? And I told her, I said, John Galusha, he did it. I go, what do you think? Do you think it's, any good? She goes, I've never seen anything like this. I've read that book, I don't know how many times, where I couldn't answer half the questions. I didn't think they were in there until I found them in the book. I couldn't even answer half of them. They were so well, and it was like, and so I said, so this is good. She said, this is the most amazing thing I've ever seen. Thank you. And then I knew I had the course. And then John added a practical section to it, and we had our course. So now it was a matter of what we're going to do, right? Which is the next part of the program. How we're going to get this done. Well, mainly, like I said, the only thing that I ever found successful from all this DIS6 stuff that we did in the org was the FSMs. So I want to work with the field people, right? That's how we can get this going. So I went into the organization there, and I told them, of course, I'm on a special project with Diana, and what I'd like is any people you have that are not real prospects for you. People that don't have any money, people that are not trainable, that are just sitting out there. If you have people like that, well, they had a bunch of people like that that would sometimes wander into the org and try to find somebody that would, work with them as a student on a course, but they didn't have anything. So the org was totally willing to hand these names over to me because they weren't anything to them, right? Well, we can't train these people anyway. They're bad students. They don't have any money. You can take them, right? And some of them were like, I remember one old lady that was back there from the 50s that knew John and never did anything. That she just hung around all those years. So I didn't have the money yet to have our own office. So there was a Scientologist in Denver I knew that owned a building on the west side, a business guy, and I asked him if he had any spare office, if he could help me. He says, "Sure, I have an office with no one in it. You can use that office." So I rented some furniture and we put it in this office. We had a little room which was big enough to do lectures in, and then a reception, and then another couple of little offices. So it was just perfect for us. And so I would call these people up and invite them to come in, right? And then I would sit down and brief them on the whole thing, what we were doing, tell them about it, that sort of thing. And most of them, once I went over everything, were very excited about it. So they would get on the course. Now, we were only charging $350 for the course. It wasn't a big price, so most of these people could get $350 together, right?
Yeah, I was going to ask how much you charge. That's actually very reasonable. Yeah.
No, the only way we're going to do well is have a lot of people, to be able to make a living off it, to even have an office. But I didn't want it. These people couldn't have afforded it. We didn't want to charge a lot. We just wanted to get this thing going, but we needed some money, obviously. So 350 seemed pretty good at the time. So that's what we did. And the people started coming in and they started doing very well. They'd either do the lessons by mail or they'd come in and we'd have a place where they could do it in the office, right? And do the lessons right there. And we also, one of the great things we started doing, and you have a picture of John and I, we had this little room and they would come in and then they'd bring friends in, because a lot of these people had friends that they wanted to bring into the org, but they didn't want them. They didn't want them to get over-regged or messed up or mishandled. So they brought them in here. And what we would do is I would get up and I would talk to them. Now I got to tell you one other thing I forgot is I mentioned that we were going to set up an organization outside of the church, which she approved.
Right.
And which I did. I incorporated. The company was Survival Services International Incorporated, regular corporation. And that's how we were doing business, and we were doing this underneath that corporation. So people would come into Survival Services, and they bring friends, and then I would get up and I give a little talk, and then I would turn it over to John, and then John would get up and he would talk to the audience for a little bit, and then he would ask for a volunteer, and a guy would come up and he'd sit him down in front of the audience in a chair across from him, and he'd do a session of Dianetics. And when I say book one, that's Dianetics, the Modern Science of Mental Health.
Right.
Why it's book one? Because it was the first. They called it book one because it was the first book on the subject. So
right.
so book one. He would do a session, and of course, every session the guy did was amazing. I couldn't believe it. I'd sit there watching these sessions, and these people he just handled them right there in front of the audience. And afterwards, the other people, they either wanted to do book one, and that which we would do, John, we deliver for $50 an hour to these people, or they could get on the course and do it on each other, do the correspondence, and then do that sort of thing.
Like a co-audit, right? Where each one is auditing each other and not charge them the $50, right?
No, if they wanted it professionally from John, they could pay $50. Some of them did. They wanted it. The other ones, they just got on the course, and then we'd get them going. They could come there, do it from home. So in doing this, especially these people that were complete washouts to the org, they're all doing fine. We didn't have any problem with them as students. None of them. Didn't have to do the student hat or anything. Just look up your word. Big deal. That was it.
Right.
Just look it up. That was it. and they were all doing well. And some of them were interested in training with, other training when they had it. So the org and the local mission, they're seeing this, and now they're getting interested. The local orgs and missions. What is this? What are you doing? So then they start sending other public in, because I explain it to them and their staff. So we really got something going here now, and it's really starting to crank, and a lot of people are getting involved with it, the whole thing. But I'm figuring now that things are starting to go, and this is now, that was May. So it was Christmas, and we were going out to Rebecca's family's house for Christmas in Connecticut. So while I was there, there was a good friend of Rebecca's and Amos's, and he was a mission holder in the Westport, Connecticut mission by the name of Peter Pinchot. And while I was there at her house, I think he came over for dinner, and I took him up in one of the rooms, and I did the briefing on him, because that's what I do. And by now I actually had given this talk to people, this what I call briefing, that I ended up writing it up. So I could just hand it to people and they could read it, and then I could discuss it with them. So I do this with Peter there, and he's like blown away. He says, "Oh my God, this is great. This is fantastic. Would you do some? I want to get my people onto this. I want to do this." So we arranged with him to come back and do an actual little event at his mission, like we've been modeled after all our evening events, because we did those every night, weekends, where people could bring people in. So, right. So basically, John and I went back to Connecticut a month or so later, and we delivered the same kind of event for all of his people. And all they did was they would just gather people, that had never had any auditing, brand new. Maybe somebody did the comm course or something, and get volunteer. Who would you volunteer to come up and do that if they call it? Yeah. So that he already had people lined up. So when John would get there and say, "Do I have any volunteers?" All these people would raise their hand. He just pick one, and then he would do those. So then we got all these people onto the course. Well, now after this, I'm starting to figure, we're going to start getting the attention of the Guardian's office and stuff now. And, I'm going to have, this thing's going well. I'm going to have to launch this thing quickly, internationally somehow. So this is 1981 by now, and New Era Dianetics for OTs had come out, NOTs.
Right.
And Hubbard, Hubbard had redesigned the whole, upper end of the bridge above the level of OT3. Used to be OT4, 5, 6, and 7, and he had taken all those off the bridge, and just anybody OT3 or above was put on this new form of auditing called NOTs. So I was OT3. I'd never done the other ones. So I figured, I'd like to go do this. I had enough for 25 hours on account still. So I figured I could do this. I could put it together. I want to do that. But I figured at the same time, this would give me an opportunity to launch the Book One movement, right, from there. So I went to Flag, but I brought along lessons. I brought for the course. I brought along a credit card machine. I brought around credit card slips, an invoice book, and in a separate briefcase, all this stuff. And so I go there, and so I figured, this. When I first got there, I went to the people in Division 6 at Flag, and some of them I knew. I think Lizzie was there at the time, Lizzie Gablehouse. But these people were being pretty heavily harassed by this new management, right? About statistics and everything. They didn't really have time to listen to me. And even Diana, it was like, I'm just there. So all I did is told Diana I'm here, pretty much. And I'm trying to figure out how do I do this? So, and nobody seemed that interested at the time. Everybody was great, loved seeing me, because now I wasn't declared. I'm back there. I'm getting to see all these guys again. That was all nice, but nobody was really interested in this much. So I went back and I started doing my auditing, but I'm only in session a little bit. I got the rest of the day. Right?
I was going to ask you, so you're doing this thing here, but with your survival, whatever.
Survival services, yeah.
Right. but it's totally separate from Scientology
Oh
Management.
no, this is
church.
a corporation outside the
Right,
church.
and the money's going to support you guys to keep
money
going.
goes to survival services, not to them.
Right, exactly. Nothing's going to Scientology.
No.
Go ahead.
Oh.
So, well, no, I have a question from that too. So, was management looking at you as like a splinter group?
Not yet. No,
Not
nobody
yet.
was.
They'll get there,
We
Janice.
weren't
They'll get
known
there.
about how well yet. Nobody knew. You got to understand. That's why I went, because in Denver, nobody was. Management. They were working on other stuff. They weren't paying attention to Div 6, like Diana said. That's why she felt we had a little time to get something done, because they didn't care. They were too busy with trying to figure out how to get all the other organizations under control and that sort of thing. Because I don't know if I mentioned this before, but oh no, I'm not even going to mention it now. That's something else. Never mind.
Okay.
Sorry, I'll mention it later. But they didn't have any attention on us. That was the whole idea. But once I went to Connecticut and that started going, I figured I better, because something's going to happen. And when I got there, I started trying to talk to some of these people in Div 6 and management. But nobody was that interested. It wasn't like they were looking at me like, oh, they just was like, yeah, you're a special project. Good. Yeah, good luck. Anyway, that sort of thing. So I'm sitting there in this, and all the flag PCs are in this place called the FCCI Lounge.
Right.
They all hang out in there, and they'd play backgammon and watch TV, and all that the Flag Division 6 was interested in with those people was to get them on mini courses to get their stats up. Well, of course, none of these people were interested. They were, and of course the flag, the registrars in Division 6, they didn't want to upset these guys, because this was their big money. So they wouldn't. Yeah.
I was just going to say, I was in management there in Clearwater at the time. And this, like you said, after New Era Dianetics for OTs was released in 1979 or 80, there was a financial and a boom in the Flag Service Org in Clearwater, where they wrote from like $500,000 a week to like over $2 million a week in income. And all these people, and we had to get so many people, auditors, trained to deliver the auditing that you came to get. And it was just taking off there. So that was the concentration there. Internationally, because I was in management, Kerry Gleason and all that, we were running this stuff and all that. It was getting new orgs and continents open, because Guillaume Lesevre was over in EU and he was opening up Italy, and then there was Latam down in Mexico was rocking and rolling, and it was just boomtown in terms of like expansion of Scientology at that time. So your little project, like in their mind, was like, oh, that's small potatoes. Exactly. We don't need that.
They had not.
Wasn't that the time, Mark, when management was sending missions to every single org?
That was in 1980. This is 81, 82 that we're talking about. It was around that same time. But just not Net for OTs just changed everything. I mean, literally, all of a sudden, Scientology had tons of money. When you have the Flag Service Org making $2 million a week, that was unheard of back in the early 70s. It was just, we kept having to buy buildings and move staff into other berthing because they didn't have enough auditing rooms. It was unbelievable. It was a huge expansion.
Well, part of that was because people OT3 or above doing the up your OT levels, they weren't getting much out of them. They were not, people were bogging. They really weren't getting all the wins that Hubbard had promised and anything about on that. So with this new NOTS, this is a whole different hope for these people. Your OT3 now. What was kind of strange is when I got there, it wasn't that long after NOTS came up, Hubbard had realized, this is just after I had paid my money and everything, and I was on my way there. Hubbard realized, well, we don't really have a bridge anymore. We just have up to OT3 and then NOTS. Right? There wasn't anything. And as much as people used to say there was 20 levels above OT that won't be released, that was all a lie. There was never anything above OT7.
Right. And just so you know, I mean, we did knots. I mean, we held it. I mean, we're not giving anything away because people know that. That's when you started auditing over and over and over again these other entities and stuff.
Right.
And it takes a long time and a lot of money. So anyway, it took a long time. And then he changed the bridge where it was like OT 4, 5, 6.
Yeah, but that's what I'm going to tell you.
Because I did OT3 and then I went all the way through the old OT7.
Right, and I did not.
And then everything I did basically got wiped out and replaced with Net for OT knots.
Right, right. And so on my way there, he wanted to have marketing wise, he wanted to have that bridge. So he just kind of took knots and some things and invented a bridge. He made OT4 the OT drug rundown, which was handling the drugs OT3 style. Not knot style. And then knots, audited knots became OT5.
Right.
And OT6 became the solo knots course.
Correct.
And OT7 became solo knots auditing. Now he had his bridging. That's all.
OT8 yet. He was off in hiding in Creston, California, and traveling around.
There wasn't
during this time.
Another whole story.
This stuff was all put together with David Mayo. I know. I'm just saying.
No,
for people who watched our channel, they know that time period.
Well, Mayo worked with him on knots.
Yeah.
But not OT8. Not OT8.
Yeah. No, not OT8. Anyway, that was crazy. Anyway, we don't need to get into
anyway. Well, that's later on. Let's stick with this. So when I get there, I find out that there's this new bridge, and they say, "Well, you got to do the OT drug rundown." That's all my money. I'm going, "No, you promised me knots." No, we don't have that. And I just threw a big fit to the point of where I was just at. And they finally said, "Okay," and they let me do knots. So I never did that.
Without it. Okay.
Yeah, I didn't do that OT4 drug rundown. I just went right on the knots because it's all the money I wasn't going to spend it off for this. And, and especially because I knew it was just a BS thing to put the bridge there. I wanted to do that. And that's what I was promised. That's what I paid for. And I'll burn the place down unless you deliver it to me. Okay. So I got onto my knots. And so in between sessions, which was most of the time is waiting to go into session, I'm in this FCCI lounge. So and there's all these FCCIs. And remember, FCCI is the name they gave to the flag public person that was there. Became a noun. Right. It was that's Scientology's.
Flag case
completion intensive.
Yeah.
Right. And they had that, but then there was the FCCI was the person being delivered to, like a PC. The FCCI.
Right.
So these guys would just sit around playing backgammon stuff, and they just blow off Div 6. And all Div 6 want to do is just get some stats on these mini courses. So they didn't care. They left them alone. So I started going around passing out my briefing to these guys and then sitting down with them one by one. And just these guys would get blown out when I get through talking to them. And I'd sign them up right then for the correspondence course so that they could be, here's something to do besides watching TV and playing backgammon. So it didn't take very much time. Yeah. I just said, look, you want to do, and they go, yeah, I'd like to do that. So I would sign them up. I'd do the credit cards. I'd take checks. I'd send it back to Rebecca. I'd send the lessons to John by mail. And I would just sit there getting all these people on course. So it didn't take very long to where all these FCCIs are sitting around in the lounge doing our correspondence course, doing the Book One course.
This is funny. I know where this is going. Keep going.
So then a lot of these people are having such great wins, better wins than they're getting in auditing. So they're writing up to the CS. I just did this. I don't need any more. I want to go home. I'm ready to go home now. Or something, or writing this. All of a sudden, what are you talking about? What MIDI course? We're not doing a MIDI course. We're doing the Book One. What Book One course? So then the CS, then they start, and now people start getting interested. Management, the Div 6 start coming. What is this? Then I start briefing them, and they start getting excited. Now Diana is going, okay, cool, So anyway, this is.
Hubbard always said 50% of the gain was from training and 50% from the auditing.
Yeah, well, and this training was special because it really gave something that they could go do. They didn't have to spend years in the metering and learning. They could just do it, and so And a lot of it, the way it was delivered, they never understood the book anyway until this course. I mean, really, people started understanding it, and the way it was done, the way John devised it, the questions were just brilliant. It just stuck the person their nose in the right place so they could really, see an application, which was very difficult the way that book was written, like I said. And like I said, Rebecca couldn't even answer half the question.
Right.
And most people couldn't. So it was wonderful. And so now everybody's kind of getting involved, getting excited, the whole thing. And now one of the things that Peter Pinchot had done is that he put together this weekend seminar. And the whole purpose was to get people interested there, his public interested in Book One. And then once they go through the weekend seminar, he'd get them onto the correspondence course. Right? That was the whole idea, to get them on to become competent. So I figured, they wanted us to do something. They wanted me to come down because this wasn't that, it was not March, maybe it was February or something, but they wanted me to come down, and they wanted me to come and do something for their May 9th, for the birthday or something. No. I'm sorry. This is later. This is May 9th. This is close.
Yeah, May.
They wanted me to come down for May 9th, not his birthday, for the May 9th
Right.
for Book One. And
that's the birthday of Book One.
That's the publication of Dianetics, was May 9th, 1950. So on this May 9th, 1981, they wanted me to come down there. And so I already had a big event scheduled in Denver, and Peter had a big one scheduled in Connecticut. So what we decided to do is Peter would come down the week before May 9th, the week before May 9th, and deliver his seminar to the Flag Div 6, right? So that they could then deliver to their public and introduce it on May 9th. Big mistake. But anyway, that's what we figured we'd do. And so we set the whole thing up. And so Peter comes down and he delivers it to the Div 6 staff that weekend, and then of course passes out the briefings on all these people at the end. And so we start getting people, so it was great. And what we figured is once they train their people, then we can get it out internationally. Then we get the seminars being done all over the world, and they get them on the correspondence course, and then we got it, right? This is fantastic. And everybody's enthused. Diana's enthused. So we got it all set up. We go back, so I get a call after May 9th from one of from the Clearwater Mission, one woman that was there at Peter's event and also at the Flag event the following week on May 9th. And what she tells me, she says, they didn't deliver it like you did. It's not the same. There's something. And I go, what are you talking about? She goes, well, when I did your event, they passed out the briefings, the whole thing. When I came to the May 9th event, they didn't mention you, Survival Services, the book. In fact, they said that Flag came up with this event, and they said it was them that devised this seminar. So what? So I find out they totally betrayed us, and so I call Diana, what the hell? And so at that point, she's starting to fold, She's going, well, I don't know. There's nothing I can do about it. Maybe you'll get some people from it, that kind of thing. Oh, boy. I got air cover for her, but I'm not going to get much support. She was too harassed by her seniors about it. And so, I'm talking, I ended up, well, that's different. Anyway, so I'm back in Denver. I find this out. And so now that Flag is really promoting Book One, the Book One seminar that they put together, right? And when I contacted some of those people, what the hell, the guys that I talked to were no longer on post in Div 6. There was a different crop of people there. And when I asked them about it and put it to them, you know what, the answer, their response to why they couldn't let us do it is because if they admitted that this was not done by them, it would make Flag could no longer be the big brother. That was the wording that was used. And plus that money I'm going to be making that money. And that's not fair because we make $17 a week. And that's not fair. And I go, what are you talking about? The church is going to make millions. Nope, you can't make any money. No, that's not fair. So it was okay. They said, yeah. So anyway, at that point, I figure, I don't know what, but we still have this great thing going in Denver. And so John and I decide what we're going to do is the seminar that Peter put together was just for, just to get people on the course. The seminar was just a weekend thing. It wasn't that big of a deal. So we decided to do our own kind of a seminar in Denver, and we modeled it after the congresses that he delivered for LRH, where the people stood, in other words, we did it over 2 weekends. We had a much better, we had one weekend was all theory and practice, all the theory and drilling and all that. And John was the head, and then Melly came in and supervised, Melly Galusha, and then a few of our other Book One auditors. And so we had supervisors there. So we would get people every week, and then the next weekend they would bring people in to work with, new people, friends and things. They'd say, come in. And so they would bring them into the seminar, and then they would audit them the second weekend, like you said, lined up in chairs. And so they were all lined up in chairs. They'd have their people across from them. And just like the old congresses, if they ran into a problem, they would, this is one of the later, they would put their hands behind their back like this. And then the supervisor would come, and then they would get up and he'd tell them the problem they were having. And then he'd take the guy back in. And you just had to mock up your session space. It's like this. You had to be, this is where your session is. You don't pay attention to the people over here. You're working with the guy here, which is like they did in the old days. So it was fantastic. In fact, the one that you see that in those pictures of those seminars, that was a big one that we did at a hotel called the Regency Hotel down in downtown Denver. We had 50 attendees. And see, John would even go up there and do samples and all that sort of thing. Then we had like 50. That's Melly Galusha there talking to a student. Anyway, and then there was like over 100 people brought in over the next weekend. They brought friends, so we had 100 people which was just tremendous. We were doing this here, and now since I had such a foothold in Denver, Flag didn't send any of their seminar people here. They avoided Denver like the plague, right? But they were big. They were just going over doing these all over the country, and they were claiming to people that you can be a totally competent Book One auditor by just their seminar. They were actually telling people this, so people, were believing that, and they were doing it. And at this point, without Diana, I just put my attention on this. Well, we're starting to get even more attention, because now what happens is the local GO, because of what's going on, one of the woman there in the GO comes into my office. By now we had our own office. We only worked in that other one for a few weeks. Then I rented a space in central Denver, and we had our own offices and big course. Everything was great. And so somebody comes into the office during the day, this GO person, and she says, I have a real stern. I have an order from Guardian's Office Worldwide to shut you down immediately, no questions asked. So I said, oh yeah, good, wait here. So I went. I had a number for Diana, so I called Diana, and she said, even though she was, she says, let me talk to her. So I said, come here, here. She goes, who is it? Just here. So she comes over, and she, yes. She just like this, and she hands me back. After a little while, I don't know what Diana told her, but after that, she just left. She says, okay, I'll just have to contact Worldwide. I'm not going to do anything. She just left, and then once Worldwide finds out about that, then what they do is they say, they send her back in. This is like, I don't know, a week later or something, with these new orders that my being incorporated outside the church, delivering Dianetics, it will jeopardize the status of the church's nonprofit status, right? and that I have to pay at my own expense to go see their lawyers and sit down and have them explain it to me, So I went in to see, they had a whole, this whole pack of little some legal firm. And I go in there and we sit down and they would want them to tell me. And so these lawyers listen to what's going on, their own lawyers. And they said, what he's doing is not going to mess up your status any more than it already is. He's not going to do it. So I'm sitting here going, great. So then they take me out in the hall and they go, they don't have the worldwide viewpoint. This is their own lawyers. And they say, I'm sorry, but worldwide says you have to do this anyway. If you don't want to be shut down, you have to become a Dianetic counseling group. And that way it won't jeopardize their status. Even though I said, but your lawyer said, they don't know. They don't have the great viewpoint. Okay. So at this point, I'm figuring I don't have a choice. I'm going to get declared or whatever. Maybe this is the only way to go. So I go to my lawyer, and of course he's going, don't do that. What are you doing? Because this guy, my lawyer, used to be the church's lawyer. He was Chick Chiclacos, who was the mission holder in Denver. That was his lawyer for years, and became mine in the orgs. And then when the GO came in, it was one guy, so they said, you're not big enough, and they fired him. I retained him because he was great. He was great. They just, the Guardian's office had their own idea about stuff. Yeah. So he thought I wouldn't do this. And I'm going, I don't have a choice, or something. So he puts all the materials, because they don't want me just to do it. They want him to put it all together and then send it up to Worldwide to approve it first, right? Right. So he puts all the the corporation to change it over to a counseling group, and then I give it and they send it up to Worldwide, and I don't hear back. Well, I'm not going to follow up on it. It probably got lost online, in that bureaucracy, stuck in somebody's in basket. Who knows? But they don't contact me, so I'm not saying anything. So I never filed them at all, right? Because they didn't get back to me, and which was very, very fortunate that it didn't happen. But then we're starting to have little crazy problems, with our delivery. For instance, we do these Book One congresses, and some of these people that couldn't afford auditing in the org and never had hardly any auditing, then they start, instead of just bringing somebody in, they start co-auditing Book One with each other at the Congress and getting big wins. And some of these people go, God, I'd like to do that, but I'm clear. But I'm clear, because somebody had tested the clear. I'd love to do that, but I'm clear. So one of these guys get this brilliant idea that if I wasn't clear, I could do this too. So he runs over to the org and goes to the examiner and undeclares clear. He says, I'm not really clear, and your needle's floating. Great. And then you come back and now I can do it. I'm not clear. And the other guy says, well, I want to do that. I don't, so these people start going to the org, seeing the examiner and clear. Well, of course, it was fine. It was a bunch of crap anyway. But my God, all of a sudden I'm being written up by AOLA for invalidating the state of clear. I didn't say anything. They just did it, Right. And it was things like little things like this that were happening were really getting the attention. Yeah.
So now you had these people who, the definition of clear had actually changed at one point, because you used to, at the old bridge, we did, the grades and 5 and 5A, Power Plus, and R6EW, and then the clearing course and clear. Right. And then after the NED, NED for
Newer
OTs,
Dianetics for OTs, it was the same time, yeah.
Right. So there were some changes there in the Dianetics procedure. And at that point, it was like, clear for Dianetics is the same as clear for Scientology. And so those people who were Dianetic clears were not having to go up the Scientology bridge.
Right.
So
actually was right around the same time, because he did Newer Dianetics too.
Because it used to be you had to do the clearing course. Right. And then it changed to where a person could go clear And in those old days, you had a Dianetic clear and a Scientology clear.
But they weren't the same.
They were not the same. In 1971, I declared Dianetic clear and a big win doing Dianetics in LA. But then I knew I had to do the clearing course, which I did too. But then it got to, there was a point where they said, well, you could go clear on Dianetics, you could go clear here, you could go clear other than the clearing course. People were declaring clear.
New Era Dianetics came out at around the same time as New Era Dianetics for OTs. And this, I mean, there's a backstory about saving L. Ron Hubbard's life and all this other stuff, right? But New Era Dianetics came out and it redefined, you could become a Dianetic clear or you could become a natural clear.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Like you could declare that, oh, I've been clear all forever. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so people, that's what all of a sudden you didn't have to do the clearing course anymore.
Right.
That's how I did it. You know,
right? And there were people. There were those people that were saying, "I'm undeclaring clear." None of them had done the clearing course.
No,
not any of them. They
all so they were undoing Dianetic clear status.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Whatever.
Or natural clear.
Or whatever. Right. They were no longer clear. That was the thing that they couldn't do Dianetic, because once a person's clear, the only steps to do were you had to get on your OT levels. And you couldn't do any major act, that kind of a thing. So it wasn't anything you could do because they were in the non-interference zone.
That's correct.
Right. So these people could not do Dianetics until they undeclared. That was the whole idea, right? Which that's what they were doing. So at this time, I had some really interesting. I had some people I knew at Flag and Management that would get me information. I knew things that were going on because when I was there, I made contacts. And so, I'd find out some of the things that were being told. And there were people that they were actually in management saying, with regards to what we were doing, it was suppressive to make competent Book One auditors because then they will go out from the org and not go back into the org. You would leave. So it was becoming that. And
I was going to say, all during this time is when all the external influences stuff was going on, and Hubbard saying, "Oh, these people are ripping us off." You know what I mean? And the whole Peter Gillam's doing all these lectures, and all these people are making money off of me, and yet I'm not getting my cut. And they set up the World Institute of Scientology Enterprises and all this other shit. You know what I mean? And this would have been considered an external influence because you're actually taking people away from Scientology for your own business and profit, not sending them into Scientology. That was the viewpoint at that time.
But this is before. Yeah. This is a little before.
No, but this is 81. This is 81,
well,
82.
Later in 81, because I hadn't. Yeah. This was earlier than that, though, because later on is when I did meet, did see Peter, and we were at the Flag at the same time, standing in line to see the ethics officer. But that's a little later. It's a little later.
That was when the
but that doesn't mean that the Guardian's office wasn't going like, we got these people making money off of Scientology. You know what I mean? That's probably why you got that attention from worldwide.
But it's still, I'm telling you, it wasn't yet, because you're talking people like Kingsley Wimbush that was delivering his stuff.
That was
was 82.
Yeah, but that was a little bit
later. That was during the whole
finance
police. They came
the
mission. That was later.
The whole mission.
That was later. Still, they weren't coming after me. They just didn't come to Denver. Right. But people were now beginning to do these seminars and go, well, they weren't knowing what they were doing, or they were talking about competency. So then Flag comes out with the advanced Book One seminar, that this will make you competent. And they had their own little advanced seminar and started going around delivering that. And then, and what had happened at that time was there was a guy in West US at the fall of Mission US, and he loved what we were doing, right? And so he published my briefing in a mission in one of their newsletters. He actually published it, and all these missions where all their people start quitting. They're doing the Book One, and they stop doing it, and they start, and Flags come. We'll come up with an advanced one, but these people just stop doing it, just like they had in the 50s. So I wrote a second briefing, really making that clear, like this is happening because they weren't competent, and this is not, this kind of a thing. So at this point, now the missions, they're realizing, they're not getting anywhere. And once he published my second briefing in there, or my briefing in there, the missions start calling me. Can you help us?
Right.
And that's another whole story. What happens then? Because the whole flag thing failed. So now they're calling me to come out there and fix it. So that's kind of where we're at right now.
Okay,
Okay,
cool.
well, we'll carry on with the next episode. I find this fascinating. I knew nothing of any of this Book One stuff. You know what I mean? And I find it all really fascinating. I was on the other side, the management side. So, hearing all this, like that's why I fed in some information about what was going on management wise. But this is fascinating to me. All the stuff you're talking about.
They didn't want anybody to know about this stuff. The flag was the big brother. They came up with it all. They did that. They didn't want anybody to know about this.
Right. Okay. Anyway. Well, we want to thank everybody for being here. We're going to continue with another episode. Please subscribe to our channel. Hit that like button, notification button, rock slam it, like Janice likes to say. If you've got any questions or comments about what we talked about, please go down below. We read them all. Mike, I'm sure Mike, you read them too, and we'll answer any of your questions. If you want to support the channel, you can buy us a coffee. There's a link in the description there. And then, of course, we must mention Janice's liquid multivitamins, complete liquid multivitamins from Outback Natural, peach flavored. You put it in the refrigerator, get your daily dose of vitamins in one little shot. I did a little advertisement on that before. And there's a link on our merchandise store. Just go there. You can order it. It's really, really good. And it's great for your vitality. Anyway, yes, Janice.
Yeah, Mark puts it in a shot glass and drinks it. And then he licks the shot glass.
Because it's so thick, I got to get it out. Okay. Anyway, Mike or Janice, you got anything else you want to say before we go on? Carry on. We're going to carry on this conversation on the next episode.
Yeah, as usual, it's great, Mike, talking with you.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, everybody. Until next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.